Today's lesson is Tokyo Olympics bars overseas spectators. Hello, everyone. My name is Roger.
And my name is Helen.
Welcome to our program. And the Olympics are just around the corner. They are about to begin. But if you're thinking about heading over there and buying tickets to check out some of the events there, think again, because as the title of our article says, Tokyo Olympics, the Olympics in Tokyo, are barring overseas spectators. You cannot go there for the Olympics.
That's right. And by Olympics, of course, we mean the series of international sports competitions that take place every 4 years. And the Olympics this time, the Summer Olympics, was supposed to take place in Tokyo last year, but the government canceled the event due to the pandemic, and they will be holding the Olympics this year in 2021. However, with a slight modification, there will be no spectators from overseas. So spectator, viewer, or audience members from outside of Japan won't be able to travel to Japan to view the Olympics.
Okay, so let's find out what this is all about. Let's dig right in. Let's listen to the first part of our lesson, and then we'll come right back to discuss it.
Tokyo Olympics bars overseas spectators. Japanese officials announced in March that spectators from abroad would not be allowed to attend the Tokyo Olympics and Paralympics this summer because of the pandemic. They confirmed that ticket holders would be refunded.
大家好，标题中我们看到单字 spectator， 这个字是名词，特别指观看体育比赛、活动、表演等的观众。例如 The new stadium can hold 10,000 spectators. 这座新体育场可容纳1万名观众。或是 The fireworks display was watched by hundreds of spectators. 数以百计的观众欣赏这场烟火秀。另外，以下补充2个同义名词。第一 audience, A-U-D-I-E-N-C-E, audience 指观看电影、表演、演讲等的观众或听众群。举例来说 Having finished his presentation, the speaker prepared to take questions from the audience. 结束简报后，讲者准备回答观众的提问。第二 viewer, V-I-E-W-E-R, viewer 特别指电视机前的观众。我们可以说 Viewers can tune in for the next installment of the show at the same time next week. 观众朋友可于下周同一时间收看本节目的下一集。
And welcome back. So today's lesson is called Tokyo Olympics Bars Overseas Spectators. So before we mentioned that a spectator is a viewer, someone who watches a public activity or event. But a note here that there is a difference between a spectator and an audience member. You would say a member of the audience or an audience for an event such as a movie or a concert. A spectator is usually used more for sporting events or things that you happen to see that happen on the street by accident. So in any case, we're talking about Tokyo Olympics barring overseas spectators. And to jump right in, the first sentence says, Japanese officials announced in March that spectators from abroad would not be allowed to attend the Tokyo Olympics and Paralympics this summer because of the pandemic.
Very good. So that's what officials in Japan announced. They said this back in March, 4 months ago, that spectators from foreign countries would not be allowed to attend the Olympics in Tokyo, and they would also not be allowed to attend the Paralympics that take place right after the main Olympics there. So this is what happened back in March. So yeah, to be not allowed means to be barred. So in the title there, we've got the word bar, which is being used as a verb, and that just means you're not allowed. For example, my friend Pat was a real obnoxious guy, and he started a fight in a restaurant. So he has been barred from that restaurant. They're never going to let him go to that restaurant again. And here, the Japanese officials said, hey, those foreign spectators are not allowed to come and check out the Olympics and the Paralympics this summer.
Yes, but what happens if you've already bought a ticket? Do you get the money back? Well, they say, the officials have said that they confirmed that ticket holders would be refunded. So if someone has already bought tickets to see the Olympics last year or this year, they can get their money back. To be refunded means to be given back money that you have paid for an item that you can no longer have or that you no longer want.
Right, refund here is a verb, and refund is the noun. The dictionary will tell you that the verb form should be pronounced refund, but a lot of Americans, at least, pronounce the noun and the verb form the same way. I want to get my money refunded. I want to get a refund. I want my money back. That's what that means here. Okay, so yeah, I guess if you bought tickets, it's okay. You'll get your money back. That's probably going to be a big financial strain on the Olympics organizers in Tokyo, but what can you do? Okay, that brings us to the end of the first part of our lesson. Let's move on now to the second part.
Organizers said the risk of admitting fans from abroad was too great during the pandemic, citing concerns over challenging conditions and emerging variants of coronavirus as reasons. Polls have shown that up to 80% of the Japanese public opposes admitting fans from overseas, and a similar percentage opposes holding the games altogether. We share the disappointment of all enthusiastic Olympic fans from around the world, and of course the families and friends of the athletes who are planning to come to the games, Thomas Bach, president of the International Olympic Committee, said in a statement. Organizers have also limited the number of officials who will be allowed to attend.
第二部分，我们看到名词 organizer 指组织者、筹办者。举例来说 ，As the organizer of this event, you'll have many tasks and responsibilities. 身为活动组织者，你会肩负许多任务和职责。或是 The organizers of the festival expect more people to buy tickets this year. 庆典的筹办者期待今年会有更多人来买票。接着，我们看到单字 cite。这个字是动词，指举例、引证或是引用。例如 The article cited several studies on the benefits of a vegetarian diet. 这篇文章举出有关素食好处的几篇研究。或是 You'll have to cite some examples to support your point in the article. 你将得要引用一些例子来支持你文章中的论点。另外，除了上面的意思，这个字还可以指提及、原因。举例来说The musician cited her family as the inspiration for her hit song. 那名音乐家说家人是他那首畅销歌曲的灵感来源。再来，我们看到单字 oppose， 这个字是动词，指反对或是抵制。例如 Dale was the only one in the group who opposed the idea. Dale 是团队中唯一一个反对这个点子的人。或是 The council's plan to build new houses on the park was opposed by residents. 议会要在这座公园盖新房子的计划遭到居民反对。另外，以下补充两个相关片语。第一是 be opposed to， 表示反对，像是 Peter is opposed to the new tax law and he has written letters to the newspaper about it. Peter 反对这项新税法，他还因此投书给报社。第二是 as opposed to something， 表示而非……或是与……不同。我们可以说 Tina, as opposed to her shy sister, is a very outgoing girl. Tina 不像她害羞的姐姐，是个非常外向的女孩。
So in the second part, we're going to talk about the Tokyo Olympics and why organizers, officials have decided to bar overseas spectators. It says here, organizers said the risk of admitting fans from abroad was too great during the pandemic, citing concerns over challenging conditions and emerging variants of coronavirus as reasons. So basically, organizers didn't want to take the risk of allowing more people to get sick sick because of the spread of the COVID-19 disease. So they decided to not allow people from abroad to come into Tokyo, into Japan, because the risk was too great. And they cited concerns over challenging conditions and emerging variants of coronavirus as reasons. So cite here is a verb, and when you cite something, it means you mention something as a reason or an explanation for something else. So as an example sentence, I could say, he quit his job citing personal reasons. It means he mentioned personal reasons as the reason for his quitting his job.
Yeah, or a friend of mine said she supports Donald Trump in the election, and she cited various statistics in the economy saying that he was the best man for the job. So yes, cite here just means you mention something as proof of your position. So they basically said that, yeah, we're just afraid that there will be problems with the coronavirus, especially with these emerging variants. So here, emerging is from the verb to emerge, which means to come out. It used to be hidden, and now it's coming out. Oh, it was a cloudy day, but then the sun emerged from behind the clouds, and it was a nice day. So yes, these are emerging variants of the virus.
Right, and variant here means something that is related to another thing, but that's not exactly the same as that other thing. So when we're talking about the coronavirus, before we just had the simple coronavirus, the COVID-19, and then other variants emerged. So other types of coronavirus that have been called, for instance, the South African version of the coronavirus and the British variant, and there are numerous other variants. So these variants of the coronavirus have raised concerns over how dangerous they are and how many people can get sick from them. So officials decided, let's just not risk anything. Let's keep the Olympics to just the people in Japan already. Only they can view it, and let's not allow other people to come in.
Which is not such a bad idea, because remember, during the World Cup competition a couple of years ago, it was only the Japanese who stayed behind the games and cleaned up after themselves. So yeah, let's have the Japanese fans there in the stands. They won't make a mess of things. They are very neat and tidy over there in Japan. Now, polls here have shown that up to 80% of the Japanese public opposes admitting fans from overseas, and a similar percentage opposes holding the games altogether. So, first of all, we have to ask the Japanese people, is this okay? Should we bar overseas spectators from the Olympics? So they asked people, and they took surveys, or they conducted polls. So a poll is a kind of survey, and they asked people, and the results were that 80% of the Japanese public, of people in Japan, well, they all oppose admitting those fans from overseas. To oppose means you're against something.
Right, and most of the Japanese population oppose or are against admitting fans from overseas. And a similar percentage, around 80%, are also against or oppose holding the games altogether. So these other people think that the Olympics should be canceled altogether. And that's quite interesting, because one would also think that Japanese people would welcome the Olympics because it would be a big help to the local economy.
If you have lots of spectators coming from abroad, I suppose. But now you don't have that extra income coming from tourists spending money and stuff like that. So maybe that's the reason why a lot of people in Japan oppose holding the games all together. Let's just not have them, period. Let's just wait for some other day to hold those Olympic Games. Now, moving on to the next paragraph, it says, we share the disappointment of all enthusiastic Olympic fans from around the world, and of course the families and friends of the athletes who are planning to come to the Games. That's what the president of the IOC said, the International Olympic Committee. The president's name is Thomas Bach, and that's what he said in a statement. We share the disappointment. Disappointment here is a noun. It just refers to when you don't get something and you're really sad as a result.
Yeah, it's an unhappy feeling when something doesn't happen, something that you wanted to happen. So a lot of Olympics fans feel disappointment for not being able to participate. And Thomas Bach says we share the disappointment. disappointment, this feeling of unhappiness of all enthusiastic Olympic fans. So you can be just a regular Olympic fan, or you can be an enthusiastic one. An enthusiastic one would be one who is very interested in the Olympics or very excited by it. For instance, I could say, I'm not enthusiastic about going to the Olympics and watching the athletes live. I would much rather stay at home in my air-conditioned room and watch the Olympics on TV.
I think a lot of people probably share your sentiments there, Helen. But I would be very enthusiastic to attend the Olympics. I've wanted to go see the Olympics since I saw them on TV when I was a kid. It would be quite exciting. And of course, now lots of people are disappointed. That's the adjective there, to be disappointed. And disappointment is the noun here. And enthusiastic, that's the adjective. And enthusiasm is the noun. I admire your enthusiasm for the Olympic Games, for example. We should also mention here, Helen, that we've been talking about the Olympics, and then we've got the word Olympic here. How do we know when to use which word?
Well, Olympic can be used as an adjective, and it's a game that's in the Olympics event. So when we say Olympics, we're usually talking about the series of sporting events that happen once every 4 years. So we can say the Olympics are happening this year, the Summer Olympics or the Winter Olympics.
Right. So, of course, these are the Olympic Games with the adjective form there. And Olympic fans from around the world are disappointed. And also here, Thomas Bach says we share the disappointment of those fans, but also we share the disappointment of the families and friends of the athletes who wanted to come and cheer on their friends who got to compete in the Olympic Games. And that's what he said in a statement. Now, here in the last sentence, it says, organizers have also limited the number of officials who will be allowed to attend. So an official is like a referee, maybe?
Yes, a referee, or also people who are associated with the Olympic Games but who are not actually the athletes. So perhaps managers and also coaches, people surrounding the event.
Right, so I guess the referees and the umpires and the judges and stuff still have to be there, but then who work in the offices or whatever may not be so necessary, so they also will not be allowed to attend. Okay, let's move on now to the third and final portion of our lesson for today. We will listen to it first.
The Tokyo Games are scheduled to begin in July, with the Paralympics set to begin the following month. Originally scheduled for 2020, both games were postponed for a year because of the pandemic. That was a big move in itself, marking the first time the modern Olympics had been rescheduled since its inception. More than 600,000 tickets had been sold to overseas fans.
最后，第三部分，我们看到名词 inception 指成立或是创立，例如Ted Wallace has been the designer for the company since its inception in 1987. 自该公司于1987年成立以来 ，Ted Wallace 就一直是他们的设计师了。
So, wrapping up, it says here, the Tokyo Games are scheduled to begin in July, with the Paralympics set to begin the following month. So, the Paralympics are, of course, the sporting events that are held, and the athletes are disabled people. So, that's going to happen in August. Originally scheduled for 2020, both games were postponed for a year because of the pandemic.
Exactly. So, remember last year they were deciding whether to cancel the Olympics or not. And they did not cancel them, but they postponed them, which means they are suspended temporarily and will take place at a later date. So that's what they decided to do. 2020 was a pretty bad year for the pandemic, so they thought, we're not going to take any chances. We'll postpone the games for a year because of that nasty pandemic.
That's right. And if you're wondering, usually during the Olympics, you have all of the souvenirs and paraphernalia, T-shirts and caps and all of that. And it has the logo and the year. And the year is 2020. So are they going to change the logos and all of that to 2021? No, they've decided to keep it 2020. So if you're lucky enough to get an Olympics T-shirt from Tokyo or a cap that says 2020, you will have a very special memorabilia of this event because it's the first time that the modern Olympics had been rescheduled since its inception. So inception here means the beginning of something, the very beginning of an event, of phenomenon. So since the modern Olympics began, the Olympic Games have never changed dates the way it has recently.
Yeah, they've been canceled at various times in the past because of world wars going on, but they've never actually been rescheduled or postponed for another time. So that's pretty historic there. So yeah, if you happen to have some souvenirs from the 2020 games, maybe in 10 or 20 years' time, you could sell those things on eBay and make a fortune. And more than 600,000 tickets had been sold to overseas fans. That's a lot of tickets. That's over 500,000 tickets. And I can imagine those tickets were not cheap to begin with. So that refund, or all those refunds, are going to cost them a pretty penny, or should I say a pretty yen.
Yes, it's going to cost a lot. And they're going to have to refund all of that money to international fans. And that's a whole big process right there. But it's all for the best because we don't want the pandemic to spread even farther and further. So this is really the best decision that they have made.
Very good. And now it's time for us to listen to our Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第二部分提到说，民意调查显示高达 80% 的日本民众反对允许来自海外的粉丝入境。好，这边他用到动词 oppose 来表达反对。那我们来学习它的字首字根。好，先来看看Pose 这个字当名词，它就有姿势啊、姿态的意思。那么它当字根则是有这种 put 或者是 place， 也就是放置、摆放的语义。那么在 oppose 这个字当中，它的字首 op 是来自 ob 变形而来，这个 ob 它就有朝向啊或是妨碍的语义。然后字根 pose 表示放置。同学们可以试着想哦，在下棋在对战的时候，对手的棋是不是就摆放在另一头，这个敌人他的将帅兵士是朝向我们，跟我们对立的，所以我们用这种朝向然后跟我们对立这样的意思去记说 oppose 它有反抗反对的意思。那我们顺便来补充几个有相同字根的单字哦。第一个是 expose， 好，它的字首 ex 表示向外，那么 pose 表示摆放。好，那么向外摆放、对外展示，应该很容易联想到 expose， 它就有使什么暴露或是揭露的那种意思。第二个补充的是 dispose， dispose，那它的字首 dis 表示分开， pose 表示摆放，把事物分开摆放，那就有整理去安排啊处置的语义咯。那第三个补充的是 propose， 它的字首 pro 表示在什么之前， pose 表示放置。那当我们把想法啊、计划提出来摆在前面，是不是就像是提议建议呢？好，那么课文第三部分提到说，东京奥运会和帕运会因为疫情关系而延后1年，那这是现代奥运会创立以来首度改期。好，文中它用到 inception 这个字来表达成立、创立，我们也来学习它的字首字根。好，当看到 cap 或是 ceive 或是 cept 这一类的字根呢，它就拿取、掌握、接受的那种语义。那么在 inception 这个字当中，它的字首 in 表示进入或是在什么之中，那么字根 cept 表示拿取、抓取。 去。同学们就可以试着用这种植物啊，它生根的画面去联想，它深入地底下扎根，是不是就会进入土壤中，在里面把它牢牢抓住，然后它才能够开始好好的生长茁壮。我们用这样的方式去联想 Inception， 它有创立、开始或是开端的意思。那顺便补充几个这类字根的单字。第一个是 accept， 就是接受的那个字，它的字首 AC 是来自 AD， 表示朝向。那么字根 CEPT 是拿取，朝向拿取，应该很容易想到 accept 就是接受接纳了。好，第二个字补充的是 receive， 它的字首 RE 有往回的意思，然后字根 CEIVE 表示拿取，从字面来看就是取回嘛，所以 receive 它有这种接收、收到的意思。第三个补充的是 capacity， 好，它的字根 CAP 表示接受，然后 ACITY 是名词字尾。那这个字尾呢，它是表达说具有某一种特性，所以我们可以想说具有接受的特性，用这样去联想到 capacity， 它就有容量、容积或是能耐的意思。好，那么以上是今天的重点整理，我们来回顾今天的单字吧。
Spectator。The spectators cheered as both teams entered the stadium. Refund. The restaurant manager apologized and refunded the customers. Cite. Robert cited several recent studies to prove that he wasn't making things up. Emerging. The owner of the company decided to invest heavily in emerging technologies. Oppose. A recent survey found that most people oppose the death penalty. Disappointment. Paula couldn't contain her disappointment when she heard that she had lost. Enthusiastic. You don't seem very enthusiastic about the party. Are you sure you want to go?
Discussion Starter starts now!
Here comes our discussion starter for today. Do you agree with the decision to ban spectators from overseas? Why or why not?
Even though it may sound like a good idea to ban spectators from overseas, I disagree with the decision to ban spectators from overseas. First, it's really not fair to all of those people who have already bought tickets. Second, a lot of people have already been vaccinated, so I don't see how the disease can spread at this stage of the game.
Well, I don't feel that way. I think the decision to ban spectators from overseas is a good one because, like I said, people from overseas can be dirty and messy and slobby, and after they watch the games, they leave all their garbage behind, all their junk, their beer cans and stuff like that. All those Western fans, they're just so disorderly and untidy. I think the fans should only be Japanese. Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Roger.
I'm Helen.
See you next time.